Welcome to today's deep dive. Buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto's plan to grant amnesty to a staggering 44,000 prisoners.
Wow, that's quite a number, 44,000.
Yeah, and on the surface, that number's pretty eye-catching, right?
Yeah.
But the real story here is the who, not just the how many. We're talking about a really diverse group of people.
Absolutely. This isn't your typical group of, petty criminals. We're looking at political activists.
Oh, yeah.
People who maybe got a little too vocal online and ended up, insulting the president.
Online insults, wow.
Drug users and even individuals connected to what's being called, and this is interesting, unarmed rebellion in Papua.
Unarmed rebellion, I have to admit, that's a phrase that really piqued my interest. What exactly does it even mean? How can a rebellion be unarmed?
Right. It's a term the government's using, but it kind of hints at something much deeper. And to really understand this amnesty, we need to talk about Papua. It's a region with a long and complicated history, one that's been overshadowed by political tension and violence for decades.
So, give me the SparkNotes version. What's the deal with Papua?
Imagine a place that's been stripped of half its people, families torn apart by violence, entire villages abandoned. That's the reality of the Papua conflict since that controversial 1969 referendum.
Wow, half the population.
Yeah. Many Papuans believe that referendum was rigged, that their integration with Indonesia wasn't truly legitimate, and that sentiment has fueled resistance ever since.
That's heartbreaking, but I imagine some would say the government has been working to improve the situation, right? What's the story with their development efforts in Papua?
It's complicated. There's a long history of resource extraction in Papua, with mining and logging being major industries. But the benefits haven't always trickled down to the Papuan people themselves.
So are you saying this amnesty could be about more than just releasing prisoners? Could it be part of a strategy to quiet any opposition, maybe smooth the way for things like mining operations?
Possibly. The government's official line is that they're seeking peace and national stability. But whether releasing a few thousand prisoners can truly achieve that is, it's debatable.
Right.
Especially when you consider groups like the TPNPB-OPM, the Free Papua Movement. They're fighting for full independence from Indonesia.
I can't imagine they're too thrilled about this amnesty, are they?
Not really.
Huh.
Their spokesperson has publicly stated that they will not surrender, even with this amnesty offer.
Wow, strong words.
They see it as a way to kind of undermine their struggle, almost like a form of forced assimilation,
So it sounds like there were some serious doubts about whether this amnesty will actually address the root causes of the conflict. And we have people like Ambrosius Mulay,
Oh, right, Mulay.
former political prisoner, who is very vocal about this.
Yeah. He argues that this is just a surface-level solution. Releasing prisoners is one thing, but true reconciliation, that requires a much deeper commitment from the government.
So if there's so much skepticism, why is the government pushing this amnesty so hard? Do they really think it'll bring lasting peace?
Well, it's interesting because they do have support from some key players. The DPR members and even the National Human Rights Commission see this as a potential starting point for peace talks.
So there's a glimmer of hope that this could lead to some real dialogue.
Potentially. But remember, there's a catch, particularly for KKB members, those considered part of armed criminal groups. To get amnesty, they have to pledge allegiance to Indonesia.
That seems like a pretty big ask.
It is.
Especially given a history of mistrust between Papua and the Indonesian government.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Is this truly about forgiveness? About reconciliation? Or is it more about political maneuvering? That's the big question. It seems like we need to dig a little deeper, go beyond the headlines to understand what's really going on here. To do that, we need to understand who exactly is eligible for this amnesty.
Yeah, let's break down those 4 categories the government has laid out.
All right, let's start with those convicted of online insults against the president. This one's interesting. So you have people who may have been a little too critical of the president online, maybe crossed a line.
Oh, interesting. So what, posting spicy memes or something?
Yeah, something like that. Raises questions about freedom of speech, but that's a whole other deep dive.
Right, maybe another time. So what's the second category?
The second category focuses on prisoners with severe health conditions.
Oh.
We're talking folks battling chronic illnesses, maybe mental health issues or HIV/AIDS, people who really need specialized care that they might not be getting in prison.
That seems like a more straightforward humanitarian effort, right? I mean, I've heard prison conditions in Indonesia can be pretty rough.
Yeah, not exactly known for their 5-star health care. So releasing these prisoners could be seen as a compassionate move. Now, the third category is where things get really interesting, and it ties back into our whole Papua discussion.
Okay, yeah. Unarmed rebellion. Lay it on me.
This category is for individuals convicted of, well, what the government is calling unarmed rebellion in Papua.
It feels like they're walking a tightrope here. You've got this long history of conflict, a desire for independence, and then they offer amnesty to people convicted of rebelling.
It's a delicate situation for sure. And finally, the fourth category targets drug users. The idea here is to offer rehabilitation programs as an alternative to serving out their sentences.
Okay, so we've got a mix of motivations here. Is this about easing overcrowding in prisons, showing some compassion, trying to stabilize Papua, or is it all of the above? It's hard to say what the government's really after.
It's probably a mix of all those things. It's never simple, right? Officially, they're saying it's about peace and national stability. But as we talked about earlier, achieving that through amnesty alone, well, that's a tough sell.
Yeah, I can see that, especially with groups like the TPNPB-OPM who are adamant about independence. I doubt they're going to suddenly change their minds just because a few thousand prisoners are being released.
Exactly. And let's not forget the voices of people like Ambrosius Mule. Releasing prisoners might be a good step, but it doesn't erase the underlying issues that are driving this conflict.
So what do you think the chances are that this amnesty will actually work? Will we see genuine progress towards peace? Or is this just setting us up for another round of disappointment?
Honestly, it's hard to predict. On the one hand, this could open up some much-needed dialogue. Releasing political prisoners could be seen as a gesture of goodwill, maybe even a first step towards formal peace talks.
There's that hope again. But it's hard not to be a little cynical. You know, we've been down this road before.
I know what you mean. Remember Philip Karma? He was another Papuan activist who was granted amnesty a few years back.
Oh, right.
His release didn't exactly stop the conflict from continuing, so it's fair to question whether this time will be any different.
Plus, the TPNPB-OPM has been very clear. They won't negotiate unless Indonesia recognizes their claim to independence, and that seems like a total non-starter for the Indonesian government.
Yep. It's a fundamental disagreement that's really hard to bridge. So even if some KKB members accept amnesty and pledge allegiance, it doesn't mean the conflicts just magically disappear.
Yeah, some might even see it as a sign of weakness within the movement.
Right, which could lead to more division and potentially even escalate the violence. Conflict resolution is complicated. Amnesty can be a tool, but it's not a cure-all.
Like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg, right?
Exactly. To really understand what this amnesty could mean, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. We need to grasp the deep-rooted issues at play here, the historical context, the motivations of the different groups involved, and we especially need to grapple with the fact that there's a lot of mistrust between Papua and the Indonesian government.
So where do we go from here? We talked about the political side of things, but what about the economic and social factors? What's happening on the ground in Papua that might be fueling this conflict?
That's a crucial question. We need to talk about the impact of industries like mining and logging on Papuan communities, how they're affecting the land, their way of life.
Whether this amnesty is somehow tied to those industries. Is the government hoping to appease any resistance to these operations by releasing prisoners and dangling the promise of peace? Now, that's a question for you, the listener. So let's say this amnesty does lead to some kind of peace, at least for now. What would that even look like? How do you even begin to reconcile after decades of conflict?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We've heard so many different perspectives during this deep dive, from former political prisoners to human rights groups, even the Free Papua Movement themselves.
Right.
And one thing that keeps coming up is this need for real dialogue, like a genuine space where Papuans can voice their grievances, talk about their experiences, and know that the Indonesian government is actually listening.
But, I mean, talking is only part of the solution, right? We've talked about the economic and social disparities in Papua. Those need to be addressed too.
Absolutely. We can't just gloss over that. Papua has a long history of, resource extraction, mining, logging, you name it. And too often, those industries have benefited outsiders while leaving many Papuans behind.
So, for reconciliation to even have a chance, it sounds like there needs to be a fundamental shift in the relationship between Papua and the Indonesian government.
Yeah, a big shift.
And that would mean, like, acknowledging past injustices, making sure economic development actually benefits the Papuan people, and respecting their right to, self-determination.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the need for demilitarization and addressing all those human rights violations that have happened over the years.
It's a long list. Makes you wonder if this amnesty is even enough to get the ball rolling.
It's definitely just a starting point, a very small step on a very long road.
I have to say, this whole deep dive has really been eye-opening. I knew a little bit about the situation in Papua before, but I never really understood just how complex it all is.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's easy to oversimplify. You see the headlines, you hear a soundbite, but you don't always get the full story.
And that's why we do these deep dives. It's not about giving you all the answers or telling you what to think. It's about giving you the information, the different perspectives, so you can form your own informed opinions.
Right. It's about empowering you, the listener, to engage with these complicated issues and be a part of the conversation.
So as we wrap things up here, we want to leave you with this thought. This amnesty has the potential to be a step towards peace. But it's just that, a step. The road to reconciliation in Papua is long, and there are going to be a lot of challenges along the way.
And it's going to take a lot of effort from everyone involved. Open dialogue, a willingness to listen, and a real commitment to addressing the root causes of this conflict.
We encourage you to keep learning about this issue, seek out different perspectives, and really think critically about the information you come across.
And most importantly, we want you to ask yourself, what do you think are the key ingredients for lasting peace in Papua? What role can the Indonesian government, the Papuan people, and even the international community play in creating a just and equitable future for this region?
Those are big questions, and there are no easy answers, but they're questions worth wrestling with. And we hope this deep dive has given you the knowledge and the tools to start those conversations and be a part of finding those solutions. Thanks for joining us.